I understand that many people have very strong opinions and may disagree with my decision.
There is a specific level of greed that can instantly destroy a 35-year brotherhood. For over 3 decades, Steve Loy was the ultimate shield for Phil Mickelson. He forgave the $100 million gambling addictions. He survived the federal insider trading investigations. He stood firm through the toxic Saudi backlash that bankrupted Phil's reputation. Any other agent would have run for the hills, but Coach stayed. Until Phil crossed a line that was completely unforgivable. This isn't a story about LIV Golf, and it's not a mutual business split. It is the story of a secret calculation over exactly $2.4 million, a face-to-face confrontation in Florida, and the final chilling sentence that caused the most loyal man in sports to permanently walk away. In a move that has sent absolute shockwaves through the foundations of professional golf, Steve Loy has officially dropped his biggest client. After more than 2 decades managing Phil's multi-million-dollar empire and 3.5 decades of intense personal history, the man they call Coach has finally walked away. And the trigger? A bitter, ugly, private fight over exactly $2.4 million. Here is the part that should make every single golf fan stop what they're doing and pay close attention. This wasn't a slow drift apart over old age. This wasn't a mutual friendly decision to see other people. This was a brutal, head-on collision over money that has now spilled out into the public eye, leaving the entire golf world asking the exact same question. What could possibly be worth destroying a 35-year brotherhood? The answer is far more complicated than you think, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the original LIV Golf contract you are probably assuming it does. The real story behind that $2.4 million involves something far more personal. Something that happened years before LIV Golf was even a thought in a Saudi executive's mind. In my honest opinion, this proves that even the deepest, most unbreakable loyalty in sports has a price tag, and when calculated greed gets involved, all bets are off. Do you think Steve Loy was justified in finally pulling the plug, or should he have found a way to honor their history and make it work? Drop your take in the comments right now. I really want to hear what you think. And if you want to understand exactly what that money was really for, and why this toxic split has been brewing far longer than anyone realized, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because the full story is about to unfold, and it completely changes everything you thought you knew about the final chapter of Phil Mickelson's career. But before we get to the exact moment everything shattered, you have to understand who Steve Loy actually is. He wasn't some corporate, hired suit Phil picked out of a high-end sports agency directory. He was the legendary coach who spotted a teenage Phil Mickelson at a junior tournament and realized right then and there that this kid was going to change the game of golf forever. He recruited him to Arizona State University, molded his aggressive style of play, and protected him like a son. When Phil shocked the world and turned pro in 1992, Loy didn't just shake his hand, wish him luck, and go back to his college office. He did something radical. He walked away from his own successful coaching career, the very career he had built his entire life around, just to handle Phil's business. He risked his family's financial stability because he believed in Phil Mickelson. For 3 decades, Loy wasn't just the guy negotiating the contracts. He was the ultimate fixer. He was the confidant. He was the corporate shield who picked up the pieces every single time Phil's chaotic private life threatened to completely implode his public world. Think about what Steve Loy weathered. He was right there when the FBI started sniffing around Phil during a high-profile insider trading investigation. He was there when Phil's controversial Saudi comments cost him tens of millions in sponsorships, turned the public against him overnight, and made him a sports pariah. He was standing by his side when Phil admitted to gambling away an astronomical number, well over $100 million, a figure that would make almost any other agent flee in pure terror to protect their own reputation. Through every public humiliation, every personal scandal, and every financial disaster, Loy stayed. He forgave the gambling. He forgave the PR disasters. He forgave the private meltdowns. He remained fiercely loyal, never wavering, never walking away. Which is exactly why what happened next is so deeply shocking, because if Steve Loy could forgive all of that, what could Phil have possibly done to finally push him over the edge? He had forgiven everything except a broken promise. That was the one thing Coach could not swallow. And the story of how that promise was made takes us back to a dark moment Phil thought was buried forever. A moment that has nothing to do with LIV Golf, nothing to do with Greg Norman, and happened years before the breakaway league even existed. To find the smoking gun, we have to travel back to 2016. Phil Mickelson's world was crashing down in spectacular fashion. The federal government was breathing down his neck, and the FBI was actively investigating him for insider trading. He stood accused of making immense illegal stock trades based on a tip from a notorious gambler named Billy Walters. The exact amount of those illegal stock trades? $2.4 million. That specific number would later become infamous in golf circles, but back then it was the start of Phil's worst nightmare. He wasn't just facing fine money, he was facing potential prison time. He was facing a lifetime ban from the PGA Tour. He was facing the total, permanent destruction of his legacy. Every sponsor was hovering over the contract terminate button. The media was circling like hungry sharks, and in that moment of absolute paralyzing terror, Phil turned to the only person who had always saved him, Steve Loy. Loy didn't run. He didn't distance his agency to protect his other clients. Instead, he doubled down. He hired the most ruthless legal team money could buy. He managed the brutal media storm around the clock. He personally called high-ranking executives at Phil's major sponsors, putting his own professional credibility on the line to guarantee this was all a massive misunderstanding. It was during those incredibly dark days that a private conversation took place in a tense, closed room. A conversation that Phil probably treated as mere words spoken in desperation, but a conversation that Steve Loy took as a sacred, binding vow. Phil, completely desperate, looked Loy in the eye and swore a solemn oath. He promised that if Loy could get him through this federal nightmare, if Loy could save his freedom and his career, Phil would never, ever forget it. He swore that Loy would always be taken care of, and that no future deal would ever be signed without Loy getting exactly what he deserved. He promised that their bond was bigger than the sports business. Loy believed him. Why wouldn't he? They were family, and family keeps its promises. Phil ultimately escaped prison time. He paid back the $2.4 million to settle the SEC case, and the storm passed. He kept playing, he kept winning, and for a while, everything seemed fine. The promise remained unspoken, but deeply understood. Until the year 2022 arrived, and LIV Golf changed the economics of the sport forever. When Phil signed his historic, jaw-dropping contract with the Saudi-backed league, a deal widely reported to be worth a staggering $200 million, Steve Loy was the architect. The agency commission on that massive baseline deal was clean, transparent, and settled. It was standard business. But what happened after that contract was locked in is where the real deception began. With his massive financial leverage secure, Phil began operating in the shadows. He started negotiating separate, private side deals with various international entities linked to the league, agreements that Steve Loy had absolutely no knowledge of. Phil was suddenly playing a completely different game, utilizing secret agreements and money that completely bypassed the normal agency channels. And then, the ultimate irony dropped. One of those specific side deals generated an additional layer of compensation for Phil. The exact amount of that secret side deal? Exactly $2.4 million. The very same number that had haunted Phil during the FBI insider trading scandal. The very same number his agent had risked his entire career to save him from. It was back. And this time, it was about to permanently destroy his most important relationship. But you have to understand, the money itself wasn't the ultimate problem for Steve Loy. The toxic problem was the absolute secrecy. Phil didn't tell his lifelong manager about the deal. He didn't give Loy the opportunity to review the terms or take his standard commission. He hid it. Loy didn't find out from Phil during a meeting. He found out casually, when another prominent figure in the golf industry mentioned the deal in passing during a dinner, naturally assuming Loy already knew about it because he managed Phil's entire life. Imagine being Steve Loy in that exact moment. You gave up your life's passion, your coaching career, for this man. You stood by him during a federal investigation. You shielded him when the entire sports world labeled him a traitor to the game. You held his finances, his partnerships, and his sanity together with your bare hands. And then you find out from a third party that he went behind your back to keep a dollar amount that matched the exact crisis you saved him from. The $2.4 million was just a metric. The real, fatal wound was the complete lack of respect. Phil didn't even have the basic decency to look his oldest friend in the face and tell him the truth. Steve Loy could have retaliated instantly. He could have filed a high-profile breach of contract lawsuit, leaked the explosive details to the sports media, and completely obliterated Phil's already fragile public image. But he didn't. For months, Coach stayed completely silent. He chose to give Phil every opportunity to do the right thing, waiting for a phone call or an apology that never came. Finally, Loy decided to handle it the old-school way. He got on a plane and flew directly to Florida to confront Phil face-to-face. He wanted to look the kid he had known since 1985 in the eye and ask him one simple, direct question. Why? The meeting inside Phil's private quarters was ice cold. Loy laid out the entire history on the table, the decades of sacrifice, the sacred promise made in 2016, and the sheer betrayal of being completely shut out. He told Phil directly that the money wasn't the issue. The issue was the complete collapse of trust. Phil had broken the vow he made when his freedom was on the line. Phil's response was shockingly cold. He argued that the side deal was entirely personal, not professional. He told Loy that he had already made plenty of money from the primary $200 million contract, and that this specific $2.4 million was none of his business. And then, according to industry insiders, Phil delivered the fatal words that destroyed their relationship forever. "You got yours, now I want mine." That was the exact moment Steve Loy realized the Phil Mickelson he had raised since age 15 was officially gone. The man standing across from him wasn't a partner or a friend. He was a corporate entity who viewed Loy as a disposable employee. Phil had completely erased every sacrifice, every sleepless night, and every single time Loy had put his own neck on the line to rescue him. The 2016 promise meant nothing. The loyalty meant nothing. 3.5 decades of brotherhood meant absolutely nothing. That meeting didn't end with a handshake or an agreement to review the books. It ended with Steve Loy walking out of the room in absolute silence, heading straight to the airport and flying back to California. And it was on that flight home that Loy made a calculated decision. He was going to dismantle their partnership piece by piece. But Loy didn't drop the paperwork immediately. He watched, he waited, and he let the situation breathe, giving Phil one absolute final window to make it right. But the ego had taken over, and no apology ever came. Instead, the situation got significantly worse. Earlier this year, Phil's legal team approached Loy with a proposal to completely restructure their ongoing representation agreement. Phil wanted a significantly lower commission rate for all future corporate deals. In professional sports, renegotiations happen all the time, but Phil's team added a highly specific, toxic clause. They wanted the new, lower commission rate to apply retroactively to that disputed $2.4 million side deal. It was an unbelievable display of corporate audacity. Phil wasn't just refusing to pay Loy his fair share. He was actively trying to legally rewrite history so his oldest friend would get even less. He was weaponizing his legal team against the man who built him. That was the exact moment Steve Loy stopped waiting. He realized Phil wasn't just ignoring the past. He was actively trying to erase it. And a man who had forgone and forgiven gambling addictions, massive legal liabilities, and endless public embarrassments finally hit the one line he could not cross. Calculated, deliberate greed from the person he had sacrificed everything for. Loy's exit wasn't a quiet press release. It was a targeted, surgical strike. He filed formal termination paperwork that explicitly detailed the nature of the financial dispute, ensuring that key executives, power brokers, and decision-makers across the golf ecosystem knew exactly why he was walking away. When sports reporters began calling his office for an explanation, Loy didn't scream or launch a public smear campaign. He simply issued a polite, professional statement saying the relationship had run its course. But behind that corporate politeness was a total nuclear bomb. It was the absolute confirmation to the entire sports world that the ultimate loyalist, the man who would stand by Phil Mickelson through a Category 5 hurricane, had finally, irrevocably, had enough. Now look at the reality Phil Mickelson is facing today in 2026. He is completely isolated. His career at the absolute highest level of competitive golf is effectively over. He is 56 years old, completely cut off from the mainstream golf world, and his public reputation has taken a hit from which it can never recover. The blue-chip sponsors are gone. The roaring PGA galleries are a distant memory. And now, the one human being who never left his side has permanently walked out the door. In professional golf, relationships and trust are the ultimate currency. Being completely cut off by the one man who knows every single one of your secrets is a devastating, irreversible loss. And it's a loss that no amount of international contract money can ever buy back. Phil is left to play out his twilight years in low-stakes exhibition events, cashing checks but living as a cautionary tale about what happens when you let ego and money destroy the things that actually matter. Steve Loy, on the other hand, will be completely fine. He is deeply respected across the sports industry, his professional reputation remains entirely immaculate, and he walked away with something Phil Mickelson seems to have lost along the way: his absolute dignity. When this story first broke, everyone assumed it was just another standard headline about LIV Golf or scheduling conflicts. But the truth is far more unsettling. This was a story about a sports icon who forgot exactly who helped him build the mountain he was standing on. The ultimate irony is incredibly painful. Phil Mickelson built his entire multi-million-dollar brand on being the people's champion, the smiling, accessible family man who stayed behind to sign every last autograph for the little guy. But when it came down to the one human being who had actually given up his own life's dream to protect him, Phil didn't fight for him. He fought against him, all to keep a sum of money that Loy had earned 1,000 times over. That is why this entire saga matters. It reveals something deeply tragic about what happens when immense wealth completely detaches a person from loyalty. It proves that a 35-year friendship can be completely dismantled by a single, calculated moment of selfishness. In the end, Steve Loy didn't just drop a major client, he closed a massive chapter of his own life. And Phil Mickelson didn't just lose an agent, he lost the last person on earth who truly believed in him. What do you think? Was Steve Loy completely justified in walking away after everything he endured, or should he have swallowed his pride and tried to patch things up one last time? I honestly want to see where you stand on this feud, so drop your exact thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to stay completely locked into every single new development, legal filing, and behind-the-scenes update on this story as it breaks, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, this situation is far from over, and you do not want to miss what happens next.